Today is October 11th in the year 2010. I'm Karen Herman with the Archive of American Television. It is my great pleasure today to be interviewing Matthew Weiner here at the Television Academy headquarters in North Hollywood, California. Okay, Matt, so thank you so much for being with us today. And we're going to start right from the beginning. Our first question is, what was your name at birth?
My name at birth is Matthew Hoffman Weiner, and or Matt. And my middle name is, there's this Jewish tradition of like naming people, Ashkenazi Jewish tradition of naming people after people who've died. And there weren't a lot of people that had died, so my parents, I have my mother's maiden name, which was a kind of a preppy, like an act of assimilation in itself.
Did you have any nicknames growing up?
No, nothing that I liked. My sister called me Bud for a while, but that was, I don't even remember what that was about. Just for a year or two, but not really, no. Matsky. My uncle called me Matsky. In college, we all tried to give ourselves nicknames, but none of them stuck.
And when were you born?
I was born in 1965.
The date?
June 29th, 1965.
And where?
In Baltimore, Maryland.
Is that where you grew up?
I lived there until I was 11. When I was 9 or 10, second grade, we went and spent 6 months in Stockholm, Sweden. My father's a scientist, and he was on sabbatical there. And then we traveled around for a couple of months. We came back to Baltimore. My mother had it, and my father looked for another job, and we had a choice between Cincinnati and Los Angeles. And we moved to Los Angeles, and I think that was around 1975. I was 11 years old, and so I went started 5th grade here in Los Angeles.
Do you know what the catalyst was for the move to Los Angeles as opposed to Cincinnati?
I just think it was, you know what, I do remember hearing that the job was better in Cincinnati, and my parents had lived there at a certain point in their life. My father had gone to medical school there, and my sister was born there, but I think that they wanted to move to California. I think that was it. It was a very different place when we moved here, but.
Talk about your father.
My father, both my father and my mother are from New York. My father was raised in Williamsburg, which is was at the time a very Orthodox Jewish Hasidic neighborhood. They moved out of there when he was around 11 to Forest Hills when my grandfather was a little more successful. His father was very Americanized, I think, or trying to be Americanized, very anti-religious. He was a salesman in the shoe business, and they had moved to Chicago at some point for a couple of years. I know he had opened a business in the middle of the Great Depression, which I think was a failure, and then they came back and lived in Forest Hills, which is where he grew up, and he went to Stuyvesant High School in New York City, where I found out later in life was a horrible student. And then he went to Wilkes College, which is in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, which was, I think, not what he had in mind, and was very mindful that all of us try and get into the best colleges that we could, that it would make our lives easier. And he went to medical schools at the University of Cincinnati, and he's a scientist and has a great sense of humor. And I don't know what else to say about him.
What is his specialty?
He's a neurologist. And so he's an MD who sees patients and also does research on virology and microbiology and things that have just exploded in the last 25 years. I mean, I remember him talking about the fact that when he first started out that it was it's always been an academic specialty, neurology, a lot of thinking, intellectual, even with the knowledge of virus and science and all these other things. But the treatments were limited. And then I guess somewhere in the 80s, interferon or a couple of these magical drugs came out, and they've been able to treat a lot of these diseases. But he specializes in slow virus, multiple sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, which I don't know if they know is a virus, but it's a neurologic disease that he does. Alzheimer's, AIDS became something because one of the viruses that he had worked on was something that occurred a lot. Everything to do with the immune system. So,
is he still working?
He is still working. He was the chairman of the Department of Neurology at USC for 25 years. He just stepped down. and just does research full time and sees patients. And he was Ronald Reagan's doctor at the end of Ronald Reagan's life, with no political association whatsoever. And he's fairly world renowned. I think actually he's still alive. The clinic at USC is named after him.
Very nice.
Yeah, he's very successful and a great doctor.
And your mother?
My mother is also from New York. Grew up in the Bronx. This is the family lore anyway. They graduated from high school when she was 15. Went to Ohio State. I think she taught for a year or so after they met. My father went to medical school in Cincinnati, so they were set up through some fraternity, sorority, or something like that. And in fact, I have a picture of their first date, which I don't have it. It's in the house, where they're sharing a hot dog, and it's something we used at the end of the carousel. I had Betty and Don take a picture eating on either ends of a hot dog that was based on a photo of their first date. And they're political people in the 60s. I think she was, my father went in the Army like a couple days after I was born. In 1965, he was a captain, and I think that the Army had paid for his medical school. He had done a deferment, and they had finished paying for medical school because he's a little bit older than a lot of the people, but they did that with doctors. And then they lived at Fort Bragg for a couple of years. And I think when they got out of the Army and went back to Baltimore, my mother decided that she wanted to do more with her life. And a lot of what the show has to do with actually is sort of that environment of these educated women the Betty Friedan, the educated women who are really unsatisfied. And I don't know if it wasn't just her personality that made her that way, but there was definitely a dissatisfaction, and she had tried a lot of professions. Then she went back to law school when we lived in Baltimore, and commuted every day to Washington, D.C., graduated from law school, worked at the Civil Rights Commission, and then we moved to Los Angeles, which was really in the city. When we lived in Baltimore, we lived way out in the country. That was a big problem for her, to live out in the country like that.
So
have to drive everywhere.
What did she do when you came out to Los Angeles?
We came to Los Angeles. It took her a few years to pass the bar. That was hellish. The California bar was very tough, and she had a hard time with it. And then she clerked for a judge for a year, and then she didn't practice. So that was it. And then she raised us.
Now, were you cognizant of what she was going through as a kid?
Yes. She has a very strong personality. She's very educated, and her moods, we're subject to all of their moods. My father was working very hard also, but yes, I was aware of the fact that she was unhappy, for sure. And especially during those summers of her studying for the bar, that was very hard on her and on us. And I remember feeling that there's a lot of Betty Draper in her. That's all I can say. There was a real sense of the fact that the world was not fair, that she couldn't get a job after she finished her clerkship because people would ask her in the interview how many children she had, and that was hard on her. And there was a lot of talk about the world, and not a lot of friends. Not a lot of friends for either of them. They really are a unit together.
Do your parents watch Mad Men?
They do. And they enjoy it, and they're very proud of me. But it's taken me a while to sort of deal with how, it's very thinly veiled. I wouldn't say my dad's Don and my mom's Betty, but there's a lot of family stuff in there. And I learned this when I was making documentary. When you use people's real lives, and they're always flattered. There are a few things I've done that I've written that has not flattered them, that's made them angry, that are more confessional and first person. But in the construction of the show, I think they're flattered, and I also think that they're very proud.
They ever call you up and say, why did you?
No, I wrote something in the New York Times about a gift that I was given by my mother that was a true story that my brother had been given. And that was horrifying. No one said it wasn't true. They were just horrified. So I veil things fairly thinly. I mean, the most interesting thing to me about what my family's interaction with the show is I did an episode that was very autobiographical. A lot of them are, but this was particularly when the grandfather died and the little girl was left waiting for him, and then the parents were there at the table, and that was all me. And even though I have siblings, that was me. I was the little girl. And I tried to get them to pay attention to me because I was feeling so much grief, and I did understand at a very early age the finality of the issues of mortality, were very real to me. I was very close to this grandfather. He lived with us for a couple of years. And they sent me in to watch TV, and the event was not the monk burning on TV. It was actually the San Diego plane crash, because it happened in the 70s. And the images that were on TV were horrifying. And I remember just sensing the irony even at that moment, like I'm in here watching, a handbag hanging from a tree, in San Diego, or a torso. They used to show this stuff on TV. But they don't want me in there talking about this person that I lost. And that it was so important to me, almost more than it was to my mother in my mind, or just to acknowledge it, because I was so close to him. But the details are very similar. He had been shopping for fruit, and there was a bag of peaches that had been in the car all day. It was one of the hottest days ever in Los Angeles. It was 105, 106 degrees, so my mother ate this rotten peach in front of me, which I put in the show. But anyway, afterwards, my oldest sister called me and said, "That was me. And I can't believe that you remembered that." And then my other sister called me and said it was her. And said, the oldest sister said, I was his favorite. And I thought, this man must have really been something to have that impact on all of our lives. But it was funny because it was me. And in fact, I had written a story about it. I think it was in my essay. Well, I recycled things quite a bit because it was very hard for me to be as productive as I am right now. But at the end of college, I took a writing class. I finally got into a writing class in college, and I wrote about this incident. And I think I used it for my essay to get into film school.
That's the first time that you actually dramatized it?
That's the first time I ever dramatized it, was on the show, yes. But I sensed the irony right away as a kid. You just sense the irony of like going through this experience and how horrible it was to be waiting for him. He had dropped me off, and how horrible it was to have the police push past me when I was waiting on the front lawn for him. And he was so important to me, and to be treated like I wasn't really related to him, and then seeing my mother and her grief, and then trying to be part of that, and just being sort of, as children are, just being sort of marginalized and feeling this deep loss, deep grief, this profound sense of mortality, this, oh my God, he's never coming back, and being told to go in and watch TV, which we didn't watch a lot of in my house. My parents did, but we were not allowed to watch TV, really, the kids, very much. And going in and sitting and watching that on the TV, watching that on the news, and just feeling like, oh my God, like this is so much worse. So.
Do you find yourself able to remember a lot of that kind of thing from your childhood?
I have a really good memory of it, yeah. And there's often, family histories, what Freud talks about, the family romance, and how people tell the story of how their family gets together, and mom and dad meet, and it's always a success story, and this happens and that happens in this order, and it's very much a narrative. And I frequently am listening to people recount stories that I was there at, and I know the details are wrong, and I just sort of let it go. Or they're just not what I experienced it. I've seen Rashomon. I know everybody has their own interpretation of it, but there are certain things where I'm just kind of like, I wasn't a great reader. I don't mean that I don't like reading. It was just hard for me, which is weird because I can read fairly quickly now, and I've always had great comprehension, and I always tested well. But actually sitting through a book was difficult for me. And I'm someone who was always able to learn orally. So when I would go to a class, if I heard something, I knew it, especially if I was focused. And it's still like that. And it's like that with remembering dialogue and remembering what people say. I saw that Capote movie, and he was talking about his dialogue retention. I was like, I have that skill, and I've repeated things back to people sometimes, and they're just kind of unnerved that they know that they said that, and they're really sorry they told me, or they're embarrassed that it's being brought up, or whatever it is. But I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what you said, which does not mean I'm infallible, because I'm wrong all the time, and I'm not a particularly precise person, but I do have a good memory of a lot of those things. And a lot of the details that you see in the show are things that are based on my memory, and just little things like, remembering that when you get into the Volkswagen, that what it sounds like, remembering that the radio can go on without the key being in it, things like that, sitting there and listening to the AM radio in the car while my father was out doing something, those kinds of things I remember for sure.
Oh, that's really cool.
And the big moments for sure I've experienced on some level of intensity, and I always have. And I did know on some level, having wanted to be a writer from very young age, that my understanding, my perception of events as they was happening was of some value, because it was very intense.
So what were your interests growing up?
God, I was in a lot of trouble. It's middle class trouble, but it was really treated as delinquency in my family. I liked, when we lived in Baltimore, I liked to hang out in the woods with my friends. I liked to play football and catch and do all that stuff. I liked to play war. I was really into trivia, really into the Guinness Book of World Records came out at that time, and I had memorized that thing, knew the pictures, knew everything about that. Anything that, and once they saw I was into that, people started getting me things, my mom and dad and stuff like that. So books of trivia. There was a book of lists came out at that time in the mid 70s, and there were just a lot of categorization. And my father is a trivia person. He's really into baseball, but factual knowledge is very highly valued. So, especially like movie stars. Like my father, we'd be watching something, he'd say, "That's Teresa Wright. That was your grandfather's favorite actress." And I'd be like that, and God forbid you get caught not knowing that. You don't know who Teresa Wright is? Are you kidding me? And I hear this voice sometimes when I'm talking to people like, "Don't do that." Some people don't, but yeah, I'm always surprised with people younger than me when they sort of look at me like, how come I'm supposed to know all the references from your life? I'm like, I know all the references from the generation before me. I was forced to, you know. They got National Lampoon very early on, that magazine in the 70s. My parents got that, and that was a great source of interest to me, not just because it was dirty and had naked girls in it and things like that, but just the attitude in it was very funny. And I became very familiar with the political situation at that time, and I knew who Charles Manson was, I knew who Lieutenant Calley was, I knew, you know what I mean? I knew all of these things, basically. I knew about Howard Hughes, all the things that they used to make fun of in that magazine. But I was interested in history right away. My dad is really into history, my mom also. Biographies were very big in our house. And all of our vacations, they were reading biographies. So you become interested in personalities. Ernest Hemingway was a big personality in our house. They were interested in the Blacklist. I was interested in movies, always. So my father, more than my mother, even really into movies. And without videotape or anything like that, we would go and see second-run movies. They took us to see The Great Dictator. They took us to see these kinds of things. I remember going with a friend of mine's dad, and they had a ticket to go see, in Baltimore, to go see Thor Heyerdahl speak, the guy who did the Ra expedition. And they showed a movie, Kon-Tiki, I think was the movie. And it blew my mind. It really did. I love the filmmaking. I love this guy with his white beard, or I think he had a white beard, but he was just crazy, obviously. I love being connected to the Egyptians, all of it. Yeah. And also, ironically, because I wasn't that good at school, and by that I mean I stopped doing my homework early on. I got in trouble for not doing my homework the first time when we were in Sweden. It was the first time I really remember getting in trouble. Because we were supposed to keep up with our homework, and my father would check it, and I got in a lot of trouble for not doing a month's worth of math. And my mother had gone away because my grandmother had cancer, so my father was alone with us there for a couple of months, and he went apeshit on me. And then it just continued when we moved to California, when we were still in Baltimore. The math teacher got sick, and every day while she was gone, I would go to the bathroom when they collected the math homework. I just didn't do it. And at that point, my mother was in law school, and my father was a young, whatever, academic, professor, scientist, whatever, but certainly an associate professor or something like that. And in order to make things work at school, they would drop us off at about 6:30 in the morning when he went to work, 7 o'clock in the morning, and he would pick us up at 7 o'clock at night. And so you'd think that I would be doing all of my homework and doing all these things, but I did nothing. I didn't practice my violin. I used to hang out in the library. I used to eavesdrop all the time. I don't even know how much time I spent staring off into space. And I used to go into the theater and watch them rehearse plays, which I loved. And I wanted to do that right away. That was always interesting to me. And in fact, the time we were allowed to watch TV on the weekends, this is so disorganized, I apologize, but I'm having memories here. And The Partridge Family was on Friday night, I think. We watched that show, and I loved Danny Partridge. I wanted to do that. I thought in that time in my life, I would like to be Danny Partridge. wanted to be an actor, be like that kid. He was such a wise ass, and he was so funny, and he was the center of the show. So
Did you do anything to try to make that happen? Try out
I
something?
started performing fairly early on, and I was kind of an outspoken kid. I was a precocious, I guess is the word for it, and I was a source of conversation among my parents' friends. They were proud of me, I think, on some level. But I remember them putting me. I was on Romper Room. If someone came to the school, if you could find that, I was on Romper Room in Baltimore, and probably in the early '70s.
Do you remember? Do you remember?
I do remember being on Romper Room, because the family story that went along with it is that, I think you were on for a week. The family story that went along with it was that apparently it was sponsored by Play School, which I didn't know, but one of the toys didn't work, and I kept complaining about how the toy didn't work and how cruddy it was.
On camera?
On camera, yeah. And then, they would come to the school and they would want a couple of kids to go on a science show, and I was picked for that, I remember. I did that one of those Sunday morning, kids on a science show thing. I'm trying to remember if there was anything else. I did have a fantasy about being discovered and being on television. I totally remember that. And then I became a performer. I mean, I tried. My sister did it before me, and I was kind of afraid, a little bit of stage fright. But I couldn't wait to perform in front of people, to do anything that had to do with that. And so running for office in school, making speeches, started doing plays, right away. I was fairly confident, or had a good voice or something like that. I sang, actually. I can't believe I mentioned this. I sang very, very well for a little boy. And we did a musical in Baltimore, of St. George and the Dragon. I remember that somebody's dad worked at the opera and came up to my parents and said that I should train to sing, which I never did.
How did they respond?
They were thrilled. My dad's really into the opera too. They love that. And then, trying to think, and then we came out to Los Angeles and I joined the chorus, and I had a couple of solos and sang White Christmas at the Christmas, concert and things like that. I remember that I could sing very well. I had a high voice, and I was whatever. I don't know.
You said you had two sisters?
I have two older sisters and a little brother.
And how did you compare with them in terms of?
Well, my oldest sister is an oldest child, and as I told you, something of the family dynamic. She probably had too much responsibility early on. We did not get along, and she was a tattletale, and ruled with an iron fist, and was really unhappy kid. And then my other sister was a middle child with me, and although dominated me and bossed me around, and she had a library where we could take books out. She had a bank where we had to play all of her games, which all involved all of these bureaucracies. She had a fake phone and lots of forms for us to fill out, and we would be the clients, and they would always be, she'd always be putting us on hold and everything. We used to play these games with her.
What did she end up doing?
She became an attorney, and now she's a journalist, actually, and a writer. She's an entertainment reporter, believe it or not. She's in the middle of changing her career, I think, right now, but she's a natural performer also. And she got into the theater, and I followed her into the theater. And speech and debate, my oldest sister was also into speech and debate. I did that also in high school. And my little brother is my little brother, and I spent a lot of time bullying him, and I'm pretty sure that I was pretty hard on him, but it wasn't until we were in high school that I realized that I could never do anything that would make him hate me, and I valued that. I really felt the older brotherness of not wanting him to be ashamed of me. Of not wanting him to know anything bad about me, of trying to be an example. It's very important to me. Might have been vanity also, but there was a sense of responsibility. But because of these shenanigans, because of getting into trouble as a kid, especially in Baltimore, I spent a lot of time in my room being punished. My father's very strict physically with me, and also I would get punished. And spent a lot of time in my room, and they would joke about it, like, how is this a punishment? Because he loves it in there. And I would spend a lot of time in there looking at books. In fact, one of my earliest professions I was interested in, because of Jacques Cousteau, was being an oceanographer. I wanted to be an astronaut, simultaneously discovered the ocean, had that big book, life book of the fishes, and then the idea that I would go through splashdown and have to be in the middle of the ocean surrounded by sharks made me not want to be an astronaut. But Jacques Cousteau was a big thing too. It's hard to explain. I'm saying I didn't watch so much television. It was so important. My father was really into this also, but I know I wanted to be an archaeologist for a long time because of that Louis Leakey, that National Geographic special. I'm finding the idea of having a find, of getting fame by discovering a bone or whatever, or finding out the first man or whatever. They did this. It was a big thing. It was on Leakey, and they reconstructed Lucy. Yeah, and they put clay on her face and showed you what she would look like, and that was all very interesting to me, and all derived from television.
And you mentioned the Partridge Family. Were there any other fictional things?
We watched the Brady Bunch. We had, this relates obviously to the show on some level. There was a style at this period that was very political where consumer education was part of childhood education. And a lot of young teachers, I think, had come out of school with specialties in what would now be called media or whatever. And they would teach us the Ralph Naderism of the world, which is, these are the 5 logical fallacies for how commercials work. 4 out of 5 dentists, how these things were, bandwagon, what these techniques were. And it really made you feel educated and smart, and it also made you watch. TV was such a forbidden fruit that I always watched it very alertly. I never really let myself escape into TV completely. Never let my brain turn off when I was watching TV. And then there were all the movies, that were filled with adventure. Woody Allen was really important in our house, really important. Everything that Woody Allen did, we saw, and all of us wanted to be him, which is incredible that he created. I think he probably would have never guessed in a million years that was a heroic personality, that there was something amazing just about focusing on that person. In fact, discovering when I realized that my love of Bob Hope, of those Hope and Crosby movies, or intersected with Woody Allen in that way, it was such a great joy to me. Abbott and Costello. Used to watch TV in the mornings. I mean, a lot of this stuff is very period specific. I was really into monsters. The Late Late Show was showing horror movies all the time. So Saturday I could watch TV. So yeah, you could watch Love Boat and Fantasy Island and those things. That was later on also. But I remember watching All in the Family at my aunt and uncle's house and hearing them laugh like crazy and having no idea what they were laughing at and what the people on the screen were laughing at, the people in the audience. But there was a period where this was really indulged, like paying attention to, the horror movies, the Universal horror movies, Frankenstein and Dracula, and building model kits. And I was never really like a collector of any of these things, but I think I'm like this with my kids. When you express an interest in something, you get indulged, And one other thing was I sort of glossed over, but this experience of being abroad as a little kid was a big deal. It was really a big deal. We walked to school together. I ditched school, got caught ditching school. So it proved that I was not trustworthy. We went and visited Dachau when I was 7 years old, and Anne Frank's house. These were both that summer. That definitely had a big impact on me.
Were you aware of the Holocaust, or was it something?
Yeah, we would hang out in bookstores a lot. My parents liked books, so inevitably you're in a bookstore, you're going to end up looking at the World War II stuff. You're drawn to swastikas, everyone is, Jewish or not. And I remember, I've heard Susan Sontag talk about it, but I remember flipping through a biography of Himmler. I don't even see these pictures anymore, actually. That was just pictures of atrocities from the Holocaust, and you don't forget that. And it was part of our, it's hard to explain. It was so much more recent, but it was a focus of films. There was the Odessa File. There were, I remember that movie in particular because I saw that with my parents, I think, and there was something amazing about survivors committing suicide and the secret cabal and people's lives being torn apart. And it was one of those childhood fantasies like, oh my God, they're going to come and take us and we're all going to be separated. And just another fear to throw into your childhood imagination. I was filled with imagination. I was filled with a belief in terrified of ghosts, terrified of the devil. Rosemary's Baby was that period. I saw that at a very young age. My parents were very much against violence, but we could see almost every other movie that we could see. I saw Cabaret when we lived in Sweden. I was 7 years old. That blew my mind, that movie.
So nothing was really hidden from you as a kid?
No, it was just not part of the way we were raised. We weren't allowed to play with guns, war toys, you know. And they certainly acted like these sort of big blockbuster movies that came along later. You know, even though my father loves movies, I guess Jaws was widely regarded as something worth seeing, but a lot of these movies that came along, by the time I was in college and I went and saw Lethal Weapon, I was looking at that and saying like, oh my God, this is the kind of movie I hate. These are the stupid movies that my parents would never let us go see. They wouldn't let us see things that were stupid. And by the way, in addition to controlling the amount of television that we watched, that is no TV on the school nights. That's what it came down to. And then if you got punished, no TV on the weekend. So I spent a lot of time not watching TV at all, which meant that I could not wait to watch TV, could not get enough of it. It was very important to me. But there were other shows we weren't allowed to watch. We weren't allowed to watch Little Rascals because it was racist. We weren't allowed to watch I Love Lucy because it was sexist. I remember my mother saying, "Ricky, do you want me to plots for you?" She was like imitating her all the time, like what a whipped, pathetic woman Lucille Ball was in that show. What a pathetic version of a and the show was already 25 years old, right? We weren't allowed to watch Gomer Pyle. I've since brought this up with my father, and I thought it had something to do with the military, and I think he said it was just too stupid. He didn't want us watching anything that stupid. I've never seen The Honeymooners. They didn't like The Honeymooners. I think they thought it was too loud or too low class, or I don't know what it was, but that's something.
Misogyny.
Misogyny, maybe too. There was part of that, maybe too. I don't know, you know. But I mean, I saw a lot of Gilligan's Island, I can tell you that. That was already in repeats. And Bewitched, seen all of those. There's something inconsistent about it. I think it literally had to do with when they came in and when we were watching TV. And there was something else, which there was a show that was on UHF, which, you know, that came in very badly, called Ultraman, which was a Japanese adventure thing that made no sense whatsoever, that was really like a dream language. And I love that also. And I got to a point, and I had this experience in my childhood with my experiences, and it's not just remembering back on them. It was actually true that I really had a hard time differentiating between what was really happening to me and what I had experienced in movies and TV, between what I had heard about, between what was happening when I was asleep and when I was awake. All that sort of was a continuum. And I've tried to capture that a little bit in the show, but it still is like that for me a little bit. And I think when people watch the show and they feel that it has this pace or whatever, that's sort of the way I experience the world. It is a little bit dreamlike.
Even to this day?
Absolutely. The first time, how many times in my life I was driving somewhere growing up here in Los Angeles and a song would come on the radio before music videos. Everyone has this. The song comes on and you're experiencing score in your life, and you try and recreate that. And then I remember seeing music videos when they first came out and being really kind of upset that now this image that they were giving you with the song was going to supplant whatever your experience was of having with the song. And it did briefly. There are songs that, you know, I hear them, they're from my high school era, that I have no association of being anywhere with because I've seen the videos. And there are other songs that have no videos, you know. Steely Dan was playing all through high school. There are no videos for it, nothing that I saw. That was my visceral experience of high school on some level. As was Joe Jackson, you know, and Elvis Costello, things that didn't really have videos. Duran Duran, you know, I know exactly what that song is. It has a picture with it, and it's a guy on a boat, you know.
But in Sopranos and in Mad Men, music is such an important part
Music
of it.
is very important to me.
Yeah.
It's very important to me. We had a lot of records. My parents weren't particularly into music. I listened to Dr. Demento. I had a radio. I listened to a lot of music on the radio, a lot of old music on the radio. My mother was really into Frank Sinatra. We had those records. And I think a lot of my interest in that period was trying to gain their favor, was trying to treat it importantly, because they're the crux of that. They got married in 1959. I mean, everything that's important to them is in that show. Their values, their carpeting, everything, you know. But I always listened to music, and I loved I had a record player very early on, and the first album I had 2 albums that I got with my record player. One of them was the Beatles, that Red Thing, 1960 to 1962 or whatever it is, 63, that compilation Beatles album. And then the other one was Theodore Bikel singing children's songs, which I just used Big Rock Candy Mountain in the show about 2 weeks ago. That first time I heard that was on that. And I had 45s, and my sisters weren't really into music. I think they had the Partridge Family album. That was about it. But Whipped Cream and Other Delights, Herb Alpert, had many intimate experiences with the album cover and the album. And I would listen to anything on a record. In fact, I was babysitting when we moved to California at a very early age, at like 13 years old, babysitting for people who had a 6-week-old baby. I don't know why they trusted me with this, but they did. And they had no television. And he had a collection of records, the husband did, and I listened to music all the time, classical music, whatever. Literally went through his entire record collection. And what I stumbled upon was spoken word. It was Edward R. Murrow. I can see it now, but it was on records. It was called I Can Hear It Now. And it was basically a history of the 20th century through radio, with Edward R. Murrow narrating it. 6 albums or so, starting in, at World War I, wherever they had recordings. It's all over the show. It's all over the show. My entire understanding of what things were like at that moment is from that. Of trying to imagine what we are experiencing right now historically, and how that feeling of the events processing at the moment is very different than the way it gets processed by history. It's how I knew what the shmoo was. You know what I mean? Things like that. Again, more references.
You mentioned early on that you were interested in writing and becoming a writer.
Yes, I was interested in being a writer right away, and I don't know why. I didn't keep a journal. I mean, I have recollections of interest in being a writer. I think that my parents were into writers. I think they were. I knew about Scott Fitzgerald. I knew about Zelda Fitzgerald. I knew about Ernest Hemingway. My father did a lot of writing, scientific writing, My father was really into Faulkner. I never read that until I was forced to in school, you know what I mean? It was not in style also, which is now it's completely out of style, which is shocking. Thomas Wolfe. My father used to talk about Thomas Wolfe all the time, and he actually bought it for me, Look Homeward Angel, and I read that. That was pretty, it took me a long time to get through that, but that is what I aspired to do, to write like a poetic fiction like that. And then, I got a great education. But I wanted to be a writer very early on, and I don't, even more than the movie business, even though the movie business was very self-referential then, and you used to see movies about people making movies, and I was interested. And I grew up in Los Angeles. We used to go, they were filming a movie around the corner from us. We went and visited the set. They were filming The Last Tycoon at a house right around the corner from us, and Robert De Niro was there, and gigantic movie stars, and you just sort of see them and say, this is very exciting. They actually filmed a movie at my house when I was a little boy. And the film company had ripped my parents off in some way and destroyed some furniture and lied about their location. It was bad location scout. And there was a very negative vibe about that. My parents were very much against film business and show business in general.
Do you remember what film that was?
Yeah, it was called The Chicken Chronicles. It was Steve Guttenberg's first movie. And I was probably 14 or 15 years old, and they had a sex scene in it that was shot up in the apartment above our garage, and it was interesting.
Now, were you actually writing things at that point, or were you?
I was always trying to write things. I had a journal and a diary. I wrote part of a play. I wrote poetry. That's what I did from a very early age. I wrote poetry, and I aspired to be a poet. And it's so funny that I almost forgot about that. I was obsessed with it. And I read short stories, including John Cheever, actually, in like 9th or 10th grade. I read,
Did you get them? Did you?
yeah, oh yeah, you get something different. I read Catcher in the Rye when we were in Sweden. We had no TV in Sweden either. And we read, and my father read us stories also. He read us some Mark Twain stories that were amazing, like Jumbo the Elephant and some of these first-person narratives from Mark Twain where he's lying to you the whole time, and it's so funny. But I tried to write stories, but I really was writing lyric poetry and writing about the things that matter to me, like about my parents, but very, very elaborate, thesaurusized, big words, meter, rhyme, sonnets, disciplined, somewhat disciplined, especially. It wasn't my boyfriend and I are walking on the beach kind of poetry. It was very, I'd say pretentious, but also was trying to sort of take it seriously.
Did you show them to people?
I did. I put them in the literary magazine, and I ran the literary magazine in high school by the time I left, and I realized at a certain point that I was good at it and that there was something in it, whatever I was doing. I wrote a lot about being a virgin. I wrote a lot about being in love, and I was doing plays at the same time. You know, you do these plays at the girls' school, and you'd spend 6 or 10 weeks in this intense experience, and then it'd be over. You know, you do 3 performances and do a matinee on Sunday, and it'd be over. And just that whenever I would have that sense of loss or distance or anything that's sort of melancholic, I would write about that. And then I started writing political stuff, which everyone was into when I was in high school. You know, I went to this school with political union. I would write things about, you know, it was the Reagan era. We would write about liberalism and what happened, you know, write about evangelical Christianity, write about, I wrote a thing, there was a Proposition 6, which was the anti-gay, the Briggs Amendment. I think this was Proposition 6. We had to volunteer, and I wrote a thing about that, about why people are afraid of homosexuals in an all-boys school in the political magazine. That was a big deal.
What school did you go to?
I went to Harvard School. It's now Harvard Westlake here in the Valley. My father's a big TV fan, too, I have to say, and always watched TV, and it was a great pleasure for me early on to watch TV with him because he laughs a lot and he gets involved. He doesn't talk, but like certain things that he liked that I knew were good because he liked them, even though he likes a lot of garbage also. But like watching the Rockford Files with my father, or any of those Sunday night, you know, the wheel shows from Macmillan and Wife, that was big in my house. And again, Sunday night we weren't really allowed to watch TV, but that was a special treat.
So after you graduated from high school, where did you go?
I went to Wesleyan. I did not have a hard time getting into college. I know it seems contrary to all the things I'm saying about being a horrible student, but I really was a horrible student. It's not a joke. I did not do my work. I got C's, I got some D's, I got an F or 2, I got some A's, but not too many. I got an education, but I did not know how to go to school, and I never did my work. And was involved in a lot of extracurricular activities like theater and so forth, but started clubs. People were always shocked that I was not winning awards, my friends, you know, in classes, because I spoke a lot and I participated. They had no idea how badly I was doing. And I didn't really understand what a syllabus was, but anyway, so I went to Wesleyan early decision, which was a way to sort of hedge your bets. And I remember my college counselor telling me that I would not get in there, so that was satisfying. And I went to Wesleyan, and Wesleyan was very different, but I enjoyed it. And again, I had a hard time going to school for about 3 semesters of it. I went like this, down, 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 down. Part of my major, which was, I went in a special major. I started doing theater right away. Freshman year, I was in the theater there, which I enjoyed. But I couldn't be a theater major, and I couldn't be a film major. My parents would not pay for that. But it was okay because I kind of had this snobby thing from my dad being a professor that I was going to get an education. So I went to this College of Letters program, which was great books. And you had to read the books to learn anything about it. I wasn't great at that. but I was learning a lot in class and still talking all the time. I talked in all these classes. I hadn't read the book. I used to have I don't even know where I had the balls to do this all the time. And I had a lot of interesting things to say, it turns out. But I was not a good student. And anyway, I needed a language requirement to go abroad. That was part of the major, was that you had to go abroad for a semester and study the language in the country, have that experience, and be able to read literature in that language. So I was in Spanish. I had taken Russian in high school for 4 years. Dropped out of it in the middle of senior year because I was doing so badly. And they're like, you're not going to get into college if you have a D. And even if it's Russian, you still can't have a D in your language thing. So I just stopped taking language. And I had a really hard time with Spanish because it required a lot of work, especially for me, because people who'd taken it had studied it before. And I didn't know that. And I was starting from zero, and I was behind within like an hour. Plus, it was 8 in the morning, and you had to go. Anyway, so I almost didn't go abroad. I talked my way into it. I told the head of the department that I had to go. I actually lied to her and told her that the reason I had done so badly in school was that my parents were getting divorced, which they weren't. And I had a lot of problems at home. And she sent me because my girlfriend at that time was going to Paris. We were in the same major. My girlfriend at that time, my first girlfriend, and like the only girlfriend I had for a very long time, 3 or 4 years. Someone who I thought I was going to end up with for life, who caused a lot of problems because she wasn't Jewish. And my parents were mortified by this. And they saw how serious I was, and they basically told me that I had to break up with her. They were going to take me out of school. So we just lied to them. Can't believe I'm saying that here. Anyway, so that's a good movie. I lied to them. By the way, lying to your parents about the existence of your girlfriend, not good for the relationship. But anyway, so I talked my way into going abroad, and I remember her saying to me, I'm like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And she's like, you're not going to thank me. It's going to be really hard, because no one spoke English in Spain at that time. This is 1984. And I went, and I did not speak any of the language. It was the middle of the winter. I started learning it very slowly, but about a week into it, my parents got my grades and called me on the phone and said, enjoy your little vacation. You're coming home. You're going to live at home after this semester, and you're going to go to school at Northridge or whatever and live at home. And it was a very dark period for me, and I actually kind of woke up and started going to school and learned how to speak Spanish and wrote them a lot of letters when I was there, finally saying to them, I want to go back to Wesleyan. I will pay for it if I can. I pay for whatever I can. I had some money for my bar mitzvah or whatever. I'll pay for the semester or whatever, but I'm different. And I did really well that semester, and I actually did well the rest of my education. I did well. I actually, I didn't read everything still. I read a lot of the work that I was supposed to read in college when I graduated, when I was out of work for all those years after grad school, but it made a huge difference in my life after that. I was really a different kind of student, and I was someone who was still struggling to academically succeed because I didn't understand all of that and wasn't great at that and wasn't prepared and still was blowing a lot of stuff off, but I was involved in my education after that. And by the time I got to grad school, I was a really good student, actually.
Did that kind of translate into your work ethic going forward?
The work ethic thing is so strange because I had been told how lazy I was, and it was so hard for me. And I think it's ironic that I work more than anybody that I know, and am super judgmental about other people who don't work. Extremely judgmental. It's the only thing I don't tolerate. I really can't stand people not trying and not putting in the time and not understanding that what happened to me was because I worked really hard and that I will never give up on things. And especially when it comes to, that we're not just talking about sitting in an editing room, which requires a lot of focus, but you're really, someone else is doing a lot of the work. You're mentally doing the work, and it takes time, and it takes hours, and it's effort, and you're tired afterwards, but it's not like writing. The fact that I could, when I got a job, could complete assignments and deliver scripts on time and write outlines and not just show up in the room and talk, which is a lot of your job in TV, and listen. And then be self-motivated, write scripts at home with no deadline and no money. I could do that. And that was motivated by desire to succeed. It really was. I realized that I had to do that. And to this day, I still don't know when things are finished. You know, that's been the education part of it, is knowing when to stop. Say, okay, let that go. That is done. You do one more draft on that thing, you're gonna ruin it. You know? Looking at a painting and knowing when it's finished is what I've heard these great painters, Rembrandt, talking about it, like knowing when to stop.
Have there been a lot of instances where you didn't stop and you did ruin something?
It happens occasionally. I mean, I have such a great fail-safe. I have my wife to read my work, and I have the people that work with me. And they will always say, like, you overdid it. Back it up. It was better before. Because also, I'm always so short of the mark on clarity. My drafts really are kind of visceral, and I'm terrified of being obvious, terrified of insulting myself and the audience and being on the nose. And what they usually do require focusing. They usually do require bringing the elements out. They're all there. They just mean a lot to me, and they don't mean anything to anybody else. So sometimes I overdo it. And also, I put it in the show this year. You know, I said this to my wife that was this season. I said, I can't tell the difference between what's good and what's awful. And she's the one who said, they're very close. I mean, it's true. I need other people sometimes to, you know, there are lines in the show that people have told me are their favorite things someone's ever said that I almost cut. You know, when God opens, you know, when Don closes a window, he opens a dress. I almost took it out because Roger had like 20 jokes in that speech. And I was like, why don't we just get him a spotlight and a stool and a microphone, and he can just keep going. And they're like, you're crazy. Let him do it. Let him go on like that. And John Slattery's the kind of actor that can make it seem like Roger's being funny instead of some writer wrote a bunch of material for him. Do
you usually take that advice, or do you find yourself argumentative when someone says keep it in? Or?
I'm always argumentative. My first reaction to everybody is, what do you know? And it was good the way it was, and what do you mean? And you're hurting my feelings. Always. I've gotten better about it, but I cannot take criticism on any level at any kind, especially when you've just finished the script, the draft, and you had nothing, and now there's this script, and people start picking it apart and looking at like little logic things, and I'm like, what? Where is the people carrying me around on their shoulders? There was 0 yesterday, and now there's this. Do you know what I mean? It's the grandiose personality, and then a couple of, literally within hours after that moment of, I feel so high when I finished, and then hours after, once it's been seen by other people, my confidence in it starts to decay. And I start to see what needs to be done, and and they all benefit from being cut down. 90% of the rewriting I do is just cutting. But there are things that I want to do from the very beginning that I know are good, and this has been the secret of the entire thing. It's all the pilot I wrote in a vacuum. No one saw it. I just did what I wanted to do. Things that I think are good that I stick with no matter what. I'm very hard to talk out of certain things, and I stick it through to the end. And I've been very lucky so far that I've been right about a lot of it.
Do you find yourself, if you do cut something, putting it in a later script? I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And you know, I've been guilty of this too. You know, you come across, you think of some great idea, and you're like, I'm never gonna. There's a line that was in the show about the armory. When are they going to tear that dinosaur down? That I tried on like 10 characters. I kept trying to put it into a scene. I finally did. Roger saying about that Don and Betty, that they looked like they were on the top of their wedding cake. I had that in the script about 10 times, and I finally got it in. And then there are other lines that I think are great lines that I want to put in the show, and that this show keeps rejecting them. And I'm not going to tell you what they are, because maybe I'll use them somewhere. But just things people say, too, that you're like, oh, where's that going to go? The big speech, I think I've talked about this before, but the big speech at the end of the second season when Peggy tells Pete that she's had the baby, had his child, there's a speech in there that she gives, which my wife gave to me. She woke up, she's not a writer, but she just had this thought about something's a part of you and then it goes away and you think that it's not a part of you anymore, but it's just gone. That's a very, very bad transcription of what the speech was. It's grammatically ridiculous. It makes no sense whatsoever, but it expresses something very profound. And it made the scene. And she gave it to me, and I tried it first. Almost immediately, I said, this is really amazing. I remember saying to the writer's assistant at the time, like, this is really good. And it's Linda, so I have to have no guilt about using it, you know. She's part of the show. She wants me to use it, or she wouldn't tell me. And then I tried it for Dawn, and I was like, you know what, this is very female, and it doesn't make any sense. And then I tried it on Betty an episode or two later, and I was like, this is too profound for Betty. Betty doesn't think this way. She doesn't want to think this way. And then we were in the middle of the scene, and I was like, this is where it goes. And guess what it's saying to me? It's saying it's not about giving up a baby. It's not about being in love with you. It's about saying, like, you were once part of my life, and now you're not. And coming and telling me that you want to be part of my life, it's gone. That's gone. And that's sad. So those things, yeah, I will never give up on certain things, especially if it's really witty. And there were some things that I thought of that I was like, I have to put this in the show. I don't care how much I have to shoehorn it in. The fact that line that Don had the first season, Sterling Cooper, there's more failed artists and intellectuals at Sterling Cooper than the Third Reich. You know, I thought of that and I was like, someone's going to say it. And it doesn't work in the scene that it's in, but everybody remembers it.
Let's stop there to change the tape.
Sure.